Once upon a time, everyone believed that God created everything, that he just went poof and all the animals came into existence. Later, Darwin came along and said, nope, it actually happens from a series of small changes over time. But what happens if even that is not correct? Well, there are a group of scientists out there who say exactly that. They say that we need a third way in evolution. And my next guest is somebody who subscribes to that idea and is very educated in it. Perry Marshall, coming up next on Beyond Belief. Welcome, Perry Marshall, to Beyond Belief. It's a great pleasure to have you here today. And I just wanted to jump straight into a deep conversation, hopefully, about evolution and your work in that arena. And I wanted to just show our folks your book, Evolution 2.0, which you describe as breaking the deadlock between Darwin and design. And I just want to read you a quote that you yourself wrote at the beginning of the book, where you say, what the extremes have in common is insufficient empirical science, the kind that can be measured, analyzed, and assessed for evidence and accuracy in real time. Meanwhile, there are many ingenious experiments nobody hears about, many thoughtful dialogues between religion and science, and so many shades of gray in the middle, carefully considered views that get lost in all the shouting matches between the creationists and the Neo-Darwinists. So would you mind just outlining what you meant by that, the subtitle of the book, and where you see the state of play at the moment between these camps?
Well, this started with a argument I got into with my brother. So I'm a pastor's kid. He's a pastor's kid. Grew up in very conservative Lincoln, Nebraska. And I remember when
my dad went to college there, by the way.
Oh, okay. Oh, when I was maybe 14, a guy came to our church and he did a whole week-long series about how the earth is 6,000 years old and Noah's flood and all this kind of stuff. And so I grew up in a solidly traditional American evangelical context. And, you know, then I got older, I went into business and engineering, and my brother went to seminary and studied to be a pastor and ended up being a missionary in China. And I went to see him in China 18 years ago, and he'd lived there for 4 years. And I got there and he said, I don't believe this stuff anymore. I'm not a Christian, and I'm about to move back home and stop doing this missionary thing altogether. Now, I knew that he was chewing really hard on some questions, but I didn't realize that he had just gone all the way to that point. And this provoked an argument. And I said, Brian, look at the hand at the end of your arm. I said, this is a nice piece of engineering, and I'm an engineer. I should know.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think this is an accumulation of random accidents, do you? And he goes, hold on. And he just came right back to me with a standard Darwinian textbook answer, which was, well, all you need is some accidental DNA mutations, and the falcons are going to see better every year because, you know, one of those accidental mutations is going to be better. And then he out hunts the other ones, and then natural selection takes over. And there you go. And I listened to that, and I had never really gone down the evolution rabbit hole. You could say I wasn't really qualified to be having this conversation in the first place, and that I was really reacting out of quite a bit of anxiety. But I am also an engineer. And I listened to what he told me, and I had this weird moment. And the weird moment was, Perry, just stop. Stop arguing with your brother, because you guys are making yourselves miserable anyway. And you don't really know whether he's right or wrong, because you know that a whole bunch of biologists would agree with him, not you. You know that. But at the same time, Like, so why don't you just go figure this out when you get home, but stop arguing now. And then, yeah, you probably do need to go look into this when you get home, because, I mean, in that short conversation, I rifled through all of my file folders, everything that I knew about engineering, which was a lot. And I thought, I've never learned a single thing in engineering school that would verify what he just told me.
Mm-hmm.
What he told me does not make any sense at all to an engineer. So what? Do I know something they don't know? Do they know something I don't know? I'm going to use engineering to get to the truth of this. In fact, now you have a background as a rabbi, and you would appreciate this better than most people. You have not had a theological argument until you've had it with a guy who has a master's degree in theology, and he studied Hebrew and he studied Greek, and he knows where all the bones are buried. And
Okay.
I was already neck deep in theological questions with my brother already. And what I had done without even realizing it was I had flipped it. You know, I don't want to talk about theology anymore. I want to talk about science because I'm more comfortable with that. And I sort of changed the subject, and that's where we're suddenly landing there. And so April 2018, that's the conversation I had with my brother. And a month later, he moved back to the United States, and he was done being a missionary. And I was just starting with this huge, giant rabbit hole of questions. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what Evolution 2.0 is about. It's a book about what did an electrical engineer find when he decided to take biology dead serious and try to get to the bottom of, like, is it random accident, or is there some kind of purpose to all of this?
Well, first of all, I can completely relate to that. And I went down my own rabbit hole with this a little bit earlier, sometime around 2010.
Mm.
And one of the things that I discovered, and you mentioned this, is like, am I qualified to even explore this? And with all this specialization that's out there in the scientific world, it struck me as a problem. And what I was trying to do was, I mean, and again, I have no background in science, whatever. I mean, I took biology in high school, that was it. I was trying to like understand paleontology, and the thing that I was able to determine is that there's one set of data, there is the fossil record, and then there are two completely divergent interpretations of that fossil record. One, on the one hand, saying that it's proof positive of the Darwinian model, and this is we've seen now how evolution plays out in the world.
Right.
And another camp, seemingly with serious people also, saying, no, it's totally insufficient. There are these gaps. We cannot explain how we got from point A to B.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found myself in a cafe with actually a guy from Harvard. He's like a neuroscientist. And I was asking him, as a scientist, there's no chance of me, I'm not going to get a PhD in paleontology. And even if I did, it wouldn't help, because I would just be in one camp or the other. How is anybody supposed to come to the conclusion one way or another? How are you supposed to know what's true? And the only thing I'll share with you, and then I'm interested in your conclusion, of course, is he said, listen, what you're seeing is two emotional presentations, not two scientific presentations. You've got one camp who wants it one way and one camp who wants it the other way. And that's why you see the philosophical interpretation of one set of data in one direction or the other. Mm-hmm. So that was useful only in terms of coming to the realization that it's not going to be so easy to come to a very definitive answer on this topic, and maybe many others. But did you come across a similar obstacle?
Yeah.
Or do you feel at this point like you got it and you're feeling settled with it?
Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable with the conclusions that I've come to. But very early on, first of all, I very quickly figured out you're not going to figure this out by reading the popular literature. If you just go to Barnes and Noble and pick up whatever books they've got on this, you're going to get one side and you're going to get the other side. And both of those sides are pretty shallow in terms of the facts they actually present you. What they're going to give you is the talking points that work most easily with very simple, unsophisticated people. They may think they're sophisticated, but I mean, let's be honest.
That often happens, yes.
99% of the people who argue about this don't have any background. And then there's a lot of table pounding, like, I have a PhD and I went to Harvard and you got to listen to me. Like, there's a lot of this authoritative kind of stuff.
Yes.
My angle was, what I said to myself was, first of all, as an engineer, I can appreciate that you could be totally wrong about an intuition, because I've already been doing engineering for 20 years and I've had all kinds of like intuitive things. I thought the world would work this way and it works this totally other way. So I can get how my intuitions about my hand could be completely wrong, and they very well may know something I don't know. But if they know something I don't know, I have enough technical background, I ought to be able to figure it out. So I'll read as many scientific papers as I've got to read. And if they can make the case that this is for real, then God bless them. In fact, it was pretty scary because I was willing to become an atheist if this was what it entailed. And the funny thing about it was, I wouldn't have discovered what I discovered if I hadn't been willing to go there. It was terrifying. It was like, well, you could say whatever you want factually. Like, you could say, well, faith is a fantasy and all the faith people are crazy. You could say that, but, well, I have a wife, I have kids, I have a church, I have a faith community. What I'm doing does work, like serving the needs of my life reasonably well. Am I going to butcher knife to all of that? Like, you can appreciate this very, very well. Like, well, the Jews have been doing what they've been doing for 4,000 years, and I'm a Jewish guy, and there's going to be, there was rabbis 1,000 years ago, and there's going to be rabbis 1,000 years from now, and they're going to have cultures, and those cultures are going to work. Like, are my wife and I are going to start arguing about whether I go to church, and are we going to argue about what are we going to teach our kids, and am I going to, are my brother and I going to come to Thanksgiving dinner and just stare at each other while everybody else says grace? Right. And like, well, they're not really in on the joke, but this doesn't exist. I said, because I care about the truth, whatever it is, I'm going to pursue the truth, and I'm going to take all the stuff I believe, I'm going to put it on a big giant anvil, and I'm going to start swinging sledgehammers as hard as I can. And you know what? I'm also going to swing sledgehammers at whatever it is in an evolution book and whatever is in an intelligent design book or a creation book, and I'm going to smash as hard as I can until I get to answers, because I want answers. Like, just give me the truth. And I just believe, like, the truth will set you free. And Jesus said that, and I believe that, whether this, even if this overturns Jesus, I think he had that right. So here we go. And like, down the rabbit hole I went.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned intelligent design, and you seem to frame it as pit against evolution. The subtitle of the book is "Breaking the Deadlock Between Darwin and Design."
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned to you before, earlier, I spoke to Professor Michael Behe a few months back, and at a couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with a very, very accomplished and intelligent cosmologist. I'll just leave his name out for a second.
Yeah.
And he sort of derisively brought up intelligent design.
Yeah.
And I pushed him just a little bit, and I'm like, what do you think they mean? And he seemed to indicate that they hold a kind of God of the gaps position, where like the creation to them means poof, like God did it. All of a sudden there were cows and plants and everything.
Right.
But so of course I don't think that the intelligent design people believe that. They believe that there is a consciousness, there is code, information behind the species that we find in the world, and that there has to be a designer of it, but they don't say how the design per se got made. And I checked with Professor Behe, and I said, do you guys hold this or this? And he affirmed that, yes, we do not even say who the designer is. We just say that there is evidence of design. So why is it that you feel that these two things are at odds, that intelligent design and Darwin are not in the same camp? Because according to the intelligent design people, they are.
So scientifically, I think you can reconcile the two views very nicely. And I'd like to get into that. But I also have to acknowledge that this conversation has become very politicized. And I know most of the intelligent design guys. I know Michael Behe. I know Stephen Meyer. I've debated Stephen Meyer. I've had Michael on my podcast. I've been to a lot of those meetings, and I know those guys. And the intelligent design camp is a very big tent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to an intelligent design conference and start talking to people, you will meet 6,000-year-old young earth creationists. You will meet agnostics who don't necessarily even believe in God, but definitely believe that there is some kind of an intelligence or an organizing force behind life. And then you'll find literally everything in between.
Okay.
Academia has pigeonholed intelligent design as guys who think that God beamed zebras onto the savannah and they appeared munching grass, 6,000 years ago or something. And they're like, we're not even considering that. Don't even talk about those guys. And for the most part, they won't even talk about them. But reality is it's a much more diverse group of people than that. And if you, for the sake of convenience, if you say intelligent design, people who are to the left of some kind of a center line, most of them would say something like, I'm fine with evolution. I believe in evolution. I'm not opposed to species generating new species and all that, but there is some kind of an intelligence going on in this entire process, and it's not just random and accidental. And what we're getting at, okay, when I argued with my brother in China, like in the moment, I go, Brian, look at the hand at the end of your arm. What I was getting at was this. I'm an engineer. I know engineering when I see it. This is engineering. And I know that making piles of rocks or, pouring chemicals in your bathtub does not do that. So there's got to be some other thing going on. And then I went down the rabbit hole. And then I started discovering there's a whole set of operations and mechanisms where the cells literally redesign themselves. And there's 100 years of literature around this. And that has really, until very recently, has been completely lost in the conversation and in the shouting matches.
Okay. I'm interested in hearing how the cells do that and how you think that they have the capacity to do that, because obviously that's the crux of the matter, right?
Yeah.
Is presumably in 1859, Darwin, although he didn't introduce it, but he certainly popularized this idea that seemingly a series of accidents, very fortuitous accidents over a sufficiently long period of time, can produce what's called the appearance of design. It's not actually designed, but it looks like it is.
Right.
Okay, so these cells that you're saying that can alter themselves, where at this point do you feel that they've received these programs, the coding, how did the information come about that enabled that to occur?
Well, the answer is nobody has a clue. Okay.
Okay.
In fact, there's a pretty highly respected origin of life Germany German researcher who said, like in a Scientific American article, literally nobody has a clue where the genetic code came from. And this is why I created a $10 million technology prize. It's the largest fundamental science research prize in the world. I said, it's not good enough to make up a story about a warm pond and a lucky lightning strike and a happy chemical accident. Let's actually get to an answer. And
Yes.
so I got judges from Harvard, Oxford, and MIT, and they're on my judging panel. And I put together a private equity investment group, and we have a $10 million prize. And the prize is a search for the answer. Where did the genetic code come from?
Mm-hmm.
And the thinking behind this is, if I wanted to be a card carrying creationist or intelligent design guy and say, God designed it, God did it, that's it, I could use my prize to make that argument. But I actually feel like it's much more productive scientifically to leave it as an open question and presume that it might be solvable, which I believe it might, and
Okay.
and shine the spotlight on what do we not know. Maybe there are principles in physics, like undiscovered laws of physics, that would explain where the genetic code came from. Now, if you fast forward the conversation all the way to where we are right now, nobody knows where life came from. Nobody knows where the first cell came from. We are very far from figuring out where life came from, despite
Mm-hmm.
an awful lot of hype to the contrary. We simply don't know. And what we also know is that virtually every cell in existence not only has a genetic code, which is incredibly ingenious and everything else, it
Mm-hmm.
has the ability to self-modify that code in response to whatever's going on around it. So if you put cells under stress, whether they're corn plants or human cells or bacteria or anything else, they will start modifying their own genetics and their own physiology to adapt to the environment, and they will pass those adaptations on to their offspring. And they do this as an active process, and it is not accidental. And so you can legitimately use the word design to describe what life does to itself.
Okay.
So
Yes.
really, origin of life is a design problem squared. It's not just a design problem. It's
Yes.
not just how did this code get here? It's how did these cells get here with the ability to not only read the code, write the code, but modify the code. So it's like an M.P. Escher drawing where the hand is drawing a hand.
Yes.
Okay, so like the real questions of life are even deeper and trippier than what they're telling you in the book in Barnes and Noble. It's just unbelievably sophisticated stuff.
So, can I assume that you have not received any submissions to date?
We get submissions about every 2 weeks.
Oh, I take it back.
Uh, I would say that 2/3 of them are barely worth taking a look at,
Okay.
and a few of them are interesting and good. And I've had and I'm not saying they passed, because none of them's come close to passing, but I do get engagement from very serious scientists who fully acknowledge that this is one of the biggest unsolved problems in the history of science, that it's very worthwhile. And I get correspondence regularly from literally rock star level scientists discussing this stuff with me and talking about how they think it could be approached. I had just a few weeks ago, I got a it's not exactly a submission, but I got a paper that hasn't been published yet from one of these guys. And he's like, hey, what do you think of that? And it's about autocatalytic networks, and it's about self-organization that happens inside of cells. And he thinks that this is a key part of it. And so, like, there are people that are taking this very seriously, and they're very far from actually solving it so far. And what's important, what's most important is that I'm not taking like one side or the other, so to speak, and I'm honoring empirical evidence rather than just arguing about ideology.
Great, as you should, and as everybody should.
Yeah.
Is James Shapiro possibly one of the people you correspond with?
Well, he's a very good friend of mine and has been a huge influence. We go back about 10 years, and in fact, he invited me to be part of the Cancer and Evolution working group, which is like, that's a whole conversation. Shapiro is one of my favorite scientists, and to be honest with you, I think he is the best living evolutionary biologist on the scene. His work is incredible. And he just released a book, in fact, just a few months ago, called Evolution: A View from the 21st Century, which is a second edition of his old book. And it's 700 pages. And it's remarkable. I think people will be exploring his work for decades to come.
So that's interesting. And although I never met him, obviously you know much better than I do. And his new book is 700 pages long, so I have to prepare myself to dig into that at some point.
Yeah.
But so for the benefit of the audience, he has a website called The Third Way in Evolution.
Yes.
In which he identifies, I guess, much as you have done, which creationism is sort of phase one, and Darwinism is phase two, and he is looking for another approach, which would seem to indicate that he does not think that Neo-Darwinism is up to the task of explaining how we got here, at least in the form that it is currently in.
That is so. Yes.
Okay, so I happened to mention this to very smart philosopher I was speaking to a number of weeks ago, and he was very dismissive. He said something along the lines of, "Listen, I know James. I wish him luck with all. I wish him luck with that." It was just the tenor of it was sort of like, "Listen, we all know that he's bargained up the wrong tree." And I have found quite a few serious people who just won't give that the time of day. The simple fact that he has veered, in a direction that dismisses the traditional Darwinian way of looking at evolution is enough to make him like an apostate almost. And so therefore, if that's the state of academia at the moment, how do we hope, or how does he hope, how do you hope that we're going to make any progress, given that intelligent, accomplished people are outright rejecting this direction?
Well, so I want to tell you a story about that. So James Shapiro and Dennis Noble started a group called The Third Way of Evolution, which now has 70 plus very highly credentialed scientists that hey, our names and pictures are on this website. We all think the Neo-Darwinian explanation is far from adequate to explain what we got. We also think that the intelligent design and creationist approach doesn't address the issues either. We need a third way. And they organized a meeting at the Royal Society in 2016 called New Trends in Biological Evolution. And when the announcement went out, there was a furor that arose in the scientific community, and 23 scientists signed a petition. 23 Royal Society members signed a petition requesting that the meeting be canceled. And they said, "Oh, this is homeopathy and this is ridiculous. Why are we having this meeting?" And Dennis Noble prevailed, and the meeting still happened. And Dennis is a very diplomatic, he's an absolute gentleman through and through. And he invited all of the Neo-Darwinists, if you want to come to our meeting and present and espouse your views, you're welcome to come. Only 2 of them actually showed up.
Okay.
And I was there. And there's all kinds of people that'll criticize Jim Shapiro. There's not a single one that'll actually take him on point by point. Not one. Not a single one. When it actually comes to swords clanging with each other and presenting facts and evidence,
Mm-hmm.
Neo-Darwinian position is not even defensible. And it was clearly visible at the Royal Society. I had never seen these guys backpedaling, mumbling excuses, and trying to save face. Because, and you can, the Royal Society website has the MP3s. There are papers from that conference that are all published, and you can read them in the Royal Society Journal. What was really going on was a cabal of scientists that I consider to be lazy.
Okay.
Formed a political bloc that was determined to keep Darwinian evolution right in the 1970s where they liked it.
Wow.
And because it fit the narrative they want, and they were running the committees, and they were running the journals, and they were running the grants, and they liked keeping it all to themselves. And there was a whole bunch of people that said, no, there's a much, much, much richer story here. And you can go listen to the recordings of that meeting, and you can hear all of it, including people like Doug Fatuma, who's a Neo-Darwinist, mumbling excuses about like, you know, why we're not talking about this stuff. And then there was an article in The Guardian just yesterday describing the evolution. It's like, do we need a new theory of evolution? Go look it up. You can put it in the show notes. And the author describes this battle that's going on in evolutionary biology. And one of the reasons that the Neo-Darwinists hate it is because it lends a certain amount of credence to what the intelligent design guys have been saying. There is an intelligence to this process, and we don't know where it comes from. We don't know what it is, but cells are intelligent, tissues are intelligent, animals are intelligent, evolution is intelligent. Now, the word intelligent is such a loaded word that most of the scientists I know, they don't use that word. They use the word cognition, because cognition has much less connotations, and it's not loaded with all of these politically charged ideas. But
it's still a strong word.
It's a very strong word, and there's entire journals about it. It's an entire, in fact, the Cancer and Evolution Working Group of the AACR has a monthly meeting. And so these are people that believe that cancer and evolution are very tightly linked together. I can go into it more if you want. And the last meeting that we had at the beginning of June, the topic was cognition in cancer evolution. How intelligent is the evolution? And I had 6 world-class people: Michael Levin, James Shapiro, František Belushka, Dennis Noble, and a couple of others, making a very robust case that literally every cell in existence possesses some form of cognition. And that's really the only way that you can properly understand life. And so this is really an overthrow of the Neo-Darwinian position. And like, this was the American Association of Cancer Research. This is not some backwater thing. AACR is the largest cancer organization in the world. And so there is a massive revolution underway in evolutionary biology, and we are in a totally different conversation than we were 10 years ago.
Okay. So I presume you know the book, The Structure of a Scientific Revolution, Kuhn.
Yes.
So would you say that we're in the denial stage and the bargaining stage, like, I think there's a parallel between Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of mourning and Professor Kuhn's structure of scientific revolution. There's 5 each, it seems like people are having trouble letting go, and there has to be sort of like an emotional process, for when something is overthrown. But like, it's interesting that you say that there's a revolution going on, because it's to a lot of people it's not, or maybe they just don't realize it, but a lot of people seem to be like, with their fingers in their ears, and that's it. So like, what kind of timetable do you think we're looking at? Are kids in schools going to be taught this at any point in the near future?
Well, let's talk about the 5 stages of death. So there was, what is it? Denial,
Denial,
anger,
anger, depression,
bargaining.
bargaining, acceptance. Yeah.
Okay. I think we're moving out of the anger stage into bargaining.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Okay, and here's an evidence of that. Just 3 weeks ago, Dennis Noble debated Richard Dawkins
Okay,
at
that must have been great.
the How the Light Gets In festival, and I watched it online. I watched it live, and it's going to be in their members area. Like, if you pay $10, you'll be able to watch it very soon. It'll be edited and it will be up. I have never seen Richard Dawkins nervous. He was clearly nervous. And by the way, Dennis Noble was one of Richard Dawkins' PhD examiners 50 years ago when Dawkins got his PhD, and Dawkins mentions that at the
Wow.
debate.
Okay.
I mean, there's no way not to respect Dennis Noble. He has impeccable credentials. Dawkins was nervous and he was deferential. And there was a point in the debate when Dawkins says, "Well, that's gene expression," and Noble says, "No, no, no. Epigenetics and gene expression are not the same thing." And now that was literally the most contentious moment in the debate, because Noble is very gracious and the whole thing was extremely cordial and very gentlemanly, which is totally unlike evolution debates in the past. And now, if you knew what was going on, and if you were paying close attention, if you knew the terminology, you could see that Dawkins seemingly has been living in a time warp for the last 30 years and literally has not been keeping up with the literature. But Dennis did not embarrass him.
Good.
He did kind of have him back on his heels. And the fact that that debate was cordial rather than acrimonious, I think, is a sign that we are past some inflection point. And I do think, like, textbooks, I don't know. I mean, the textbooks are literally 50 years out of date. Like, I mean, I'm not exaggerating.
I believe you.
Most textbooks are literally 50 years out of date as far as how evolution actually works. What I can tell you is that if you go to a meeting of the American Association of Cancer Research and you're talking about evolution there, they're having a totally different conversation than what's happening in the public. And it's very necessary, because you're never going to cure cancer with Neo-Darwinism. Neo-Darwinism doesn't even have the tools for conceptually grasping what's really going on. You have to deal with it as a cognitive entity. You have to deal with the fact these tumors are evolving at incredible speed at real time with intelligence. This is why stage 4 cancer is such a bear.
That is very encouraging and very interesting, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what develops. I've got about 7 minutes left, and I want to see if I can get in 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Let's talk about abiogenesis for a second, which really precedes the entire evolution discussion. Obviously, you can't have evolution until you have a self-replicating cell.
Yeah.
Let me ask, and I've asked this question to a bunch of people. I have a feeling you're going to have a different kind of answer. My understanding is that if you have 50 units of something, let's say a deck of cards that's 1 through 50, Obviously, if you pick them at random, the chances of that are 100% that you're going to, going to have 50 things, But as soon as you specify an order that you need to randomly pick them in,
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have a number that's the equivalent of my 1/3 times 10 to the 64th power,
Right.
which is a number that is so astronomical, so improbable. My understanding, therefore, is that the chances of assembling the most basic components of life, which are amino acids, it outstrips the entire probabilistic resources of the entire universe, and that even if you had 1 trillion years, of trial and error, that you would not expect to find it, and that in a certain sense, it's like functionally zero.
Right.
That being the case, whether or not any biologist has any clue as to how the code got developed currently,
Mm-hmm.
can't we just jump over all of that and say, from a philosophical perspective, not even scientific, but we can draw a philosophical conclusion that this is designed because it can't possibly have happened by chance?
So I think what this comes down to is the question, what is cognition and where does it come from? So I think the real question here is, does matter, chemistry, the laws of physics, the cosmos have cognitive capabilities or properties that we have to understand before we can even propose a sensible origin of life scenario?
Okay.
And so I think that's a more productive question than saying, well, I just think some kind of a designer did it. Well, if I look at the designer question, like the God question, as well, let's go back to the beginning. Why do we have a universe with incredibly fine-tuned constants, and why is the expansion of the Big Bang precise within 120 decimal places? And oh, by the way, did you know if it was faster or slower by 120 decimal place, that like we wouldn't even have a universe? Like, I wind it all the way back to there, and then I
Yeah.
ask the question, do we even understand what chemistry is? Does chemistry and physics have properties that we're still clueless about? Let's remind everybody, nobody has any idea what consciousness actually is.
Right.
Why am I having this experience inside my head talking to you, and why are you having this experience in your head talking to me? And then you go down to your dog, and you go down to, a mouse. Like, we've all walked into a room and had a mouse freeze. Well, does the
Yep.
mouse actually see you? Is the mouse, if you poke the mouse with a knife and it squeals, is the mouse having an experience of pain and suffering? It sure would seem to me that it is. Well, this question goes all the way down to plants and cells. Plants know you're there. We discussed this on the Cancer and Evolution meeting a month ago with František Belushka. So the question of cognition is like the mother of all philosophical questions. And what if that question precedes the first life? Well, this could turn our entire notion of physics and chemistry upside down. We may be in for another revolution the size of Einstein, when somebody actually pulls on the right piece of thread and starts figuring out the consciousness question. I think that's where this is really going.
Meaning what? Can you clarify that? What do you mean that's where it's really going?
Well, I think if you're going to solve the origin of life, you have to
Yeah.
solve consciousness first. And the
Uh-huh.
consciousness actually precedes life, rather than coming at the end of millions of years of evolution of life. Now, I don't know about non-living matter, but well, that's part of the question. What gives my, I've got a lid of my thermos here. This does not appear to be conscious, but I am. So what's the difference between these molecules and these molecules? I,
Right.
I don't think anybody has any idea, but we got to be asking the question.
Yeah. You're familiar with the work of Professor Donald Hoffman?
Yes, I am. I interviewed him a few weeks ago. It was a
Oh, really? Eh,
fascinating.
Great, great stuff. Yeah, yeah. I had the pleasure of talking to him also a couple of months ago, and what his what he's saying is right in the pocket of what you're getting at there, and obviously consciousness, panpsychism, it's all. I feel it's bubbling up. People are definitely starting to think, that this quote unquote hard problem of consciousness is got to have a third way as well, and it's my secret hope, and I maybe you have this also, but I personally think that the worlds of science, philosophy, and theology, to some extent, are slowly converging. And my great hope is that at the end of that whole road, we're going to have some kind of unified grand theory of those three things in which everyone can be satisfied in, and it really improve the humanity, because living with some of the implications of some of these ideas could improve things in so many ways. And to that end, I want to thank you for your contribution, your very major contribution to this path. Encourage people to read your book. I have not read your books on business, but I'm sure that they're fascinating as well, or engineering, but certainly Evolution 2.0, and to check out all the amazing work that you're doing, and all the people that you've assembled to help promote these ideas. It's a beautiful thing. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. And for those watching, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, comment, and to keep these ideas rolling, until we get to that point. So thank you so much for being here, Perry.
Well, thank you, Adam. And you have shown yourself to be very abreast of these very pressing questions. I think these are some of those most important questions in the world. And I just salute anybody who has the courage like yourself to tackle them and dive in, because it is so fascinating. And thanks for having me. It's a real honor. Thank you.
My pleasure, and thank you so much for being here.